Hello. Today's installment of AIC's Conversations with Policymakers is brought to you by Lau Associates. With me today is Jenna Bentley, who is the Government Affairs Director for Accelerate Indiana Municipalities. While we occasionally disagree on legislative policy, AIC and AIM more often than not will find ourselves working together on many issues at the State House, simply because legislation will treat cities and towns the same as they do as counties, because we're both local taxing units. As such, we share many of the same positions on local tax policies, local control, and state oversight, just to highlight a few things. And we asked Jenna to come visit us today to discuss some of AIM's goals for the upcoming legislative session. So welcome, Jenna.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
Of course. What are some of the things that AIM is working on for the upcoming 2024 legislative session?
Absolutely. We have heard the charge from legislative leadership, both the Senate and the House, who have said we want this to be a short, non-controversial session. And as such, we've kept our legislative initiatives pretty narrow, pretty focused, but really important to local units of government and hopefully some overlap with your membership as well. So on our initiatives, you'll see some public notice language. We're seeking the ability to allow local units of government to publish notices that typically are required in a newspaper online. I know that's something you've talked to your members about.
Yes.
And in that same vein, to trying to clean up some archiving and streaming language that passed during the 2023 legislative session, and just clarify who all this applies to. I think as local governments modernize, we recognize that city or town councils live streaming or archiving their meeting is becoming more normalized, but what can we do to clean that up for things like park boards, RDCs, and some of those smaller, more volunteer-led boards?
Well, that's fantastic. Speaking of public notice and public access, have your members found yourself dealing with so-called First Amendment auditors?
Yes, I would say it's a hot topic among our membership. We've actually talked to a legislator about this who's seen it in his district. A lot of questions about what do we do when a First Amendment auditor comes into our office? What are we allowed to do and not allowed to do? And then also to an influx in public records requests and how and when you can charge for those are huge topics among our membership, and I assume it's the same for counties.
Same, yes. And I'm sure we've probably been talking to the same legislators about the issue, as well as Luke Britt, the public access counselor. So I do expect a bill to be filed relative to the so-called First Amendment auditors this session. Road funding, of course, is always big on our agenda. I assume same for AIM?
Yeah, absolutely. So road funding is an interesting issue for our members. I think as you've seen the headlines, there's been a lot of chatter about, do we change the road funding formula? I think bigger picture, with the first task force moving to next fall and next year, is a recognition that local units of government need additional road funding. Not just zero in on community crossings and how that's allocated. That's such a critical program for our members, but the pot hopefully will continue to grow for our members as inflation impacts us, just like it does in DOT and other agencies. And so I think our first step was sharing, here's what local units are contributing to their roads. We have skin in the game, but we need more assistance.
Fantastic. And speaking of revenue in the pot, property taxes every year is something that we work on. I know you do as well. With the state tax commission going on, even into during legislative session, do you anticipate much large property tax legislation this year?
So all signals from legislative leadership has been they're not going to make any major reforms during the 2024 legislative session, but it's going to be on the table in 2025. And so we've talked to our members about preparing for that. I think one thing became clear is they capped MLGQ in response to residential property taxes last session. And all of a sudden we're hearing, well, now we can't have a big leap once that cap normalizes. And so we just have to communicate to members of the General Assembly that this is a huge reduction in revenue, or has the potential to be. And so as you adjust the MLGQ, we have some real facts and figures that we want to share. But hopefully we have a longer runway heading into a budget session in 2025 to keep that going.
Same. Those caps on levy controls had their intended effects, and now that the seeming bubble in the housing market appears to have passed,
Right.
hopefully we can get them to recognize that that was an anomaly within the property tax system that doesn't need to last forever.
Right, right.
So I want to thank you for coming to chat with us today. AIM has always been a fantastic partner working at the General Assembly. So thank you for being here. And this has been our latest installment of AIC's Conversations with Policymakers, brought to you by Lau Associates.